good. Yay. I like the Dell. All right. Should I give it a minute or two, or I'm ready when you're ready.
Ask Jackson if he wants like a 10-minute, 15. Do you want a 5-minute? I think it's better. Well, I don't know what it is.
I think we just start.
Oh, whatever you guys. Yeah.
Do you need to do some prep stuff?
And do you need like a 10 or 15-minute warning before questions or something? Okay, you're gonna. Great. Perfect. I'll just.
Okay. Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Come on in, take a seat. Come closer if you want. I'm Randy Hopkins. I'm former Director of Visual Arts at Boston Center for the Arts and co-founder of the original Boston Art Book Fair, and so happy to welcome you here. I want to start out by thanking Boston Center for the Arts and also Wagner Foundation for generously supporting the public programming at multiple fairs today. So I hope you guys are all enjoying that. And I'm very honored to be introducing our last panel of the day, which is Speculative Archives. You can see the panelists' names and the topic on the screen up there. This is going to be moderated by Jackson Davidow here, who I'm going to introduce, and then I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, or Jackson introduce the panelists. Jackson Davidow is a writer, curator, and art historian. His essays have appeared in the New York Times, Boston Globe Magazine, The Baffler, Boston Review, Poetry, Los Angeles Review of Books, and throughout the art press. With Noam Parnas, he's a co-curator of Christian Walker, The Profane and the Poignant, which originated at the Leslie Lohman Museum of Art in New York, and which I hope people had a chance to see a version of it here. And his exhibition As the World Burns, Queer Photography and Nightlife in Boston, organized in partnership with Laurel V. McLaughlin, was at Tufts University Art Galleries last year. And I hate to say, but Jackson's been a really important part of the Boston art community over these past years and is now on travels to New Haven to even do more impactful work in the arts. So really lucky to have him today and excited to hear this panel. So I'm going to turn it over to Jackson to introduce the proceedings going on, and thanks again for being here. Bye. All yours.
Thank you, Randy, and thank you, Julia, Casey, everyone at the Boston Center for the Arts, as well as here at multiple formats. And thank you all for being here with all the exciting activity going on today. It means a lot that you're in attendance here right now. So this afternoon's panel is about how cultural practitioners are engaging with and challenging the conceptual terrain of archives through public history and artistic projects. And I'm honored to be joined today in conversation by three individuals, Ebony Gill, Caleb Cole, and Dell Marie Hamilton, whose work variously advances critical understandings of archives and archival practice, who share a commitment to generating new historical narratives, especially those of local and regional import, and who look to normative archives as sites of not simply violence and trauma, but also play, pleasure, and pedagogy. and speculation, which is the guiding word for the conversation today. And now it's my treat to introduce the three panelists a little bit more in the order of their presentations. Ebony Gill is the creator of Boston Urban Archive, a platform that curates film, newspapers, documents, and photography from Boston, with a focus on BIPOC culture not typically highlighted in mainstream media. Using social media as a tool, she promotes education and history and creates a sense of nostalgia and community with a large and interactive following. The content, stories, and curated archives have sparked conversations, generated memories, and fostered connections among thousands of people in Boston. I'd say more than thousands, probably, and have been widely shared online. Ebony's work has been recognized by the Boston Celtics with the Heroes Among Us Award, and she has collaborated with the Red Sox and other local organizations and leaders. She holds a bachelor's degree in English from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, which she utilizes for her love of journalism, literature, and storytelling. Caleb Cole is a Midwest-born Boston-based artist whose work addresses the opportunities and difficulties of queer belonging. Using collage, assemblage, photography, and video, they bring secondhand objects and media together for chance encounters, deliberately placing materials from different time periods into conversation with one another as a means of thinking about a lineage of queer culture while resisting a singular progressive genealogy. Caleb has received an Artadia Finalist Award, Hearst 8x10 Biennial Award, Massachusetts Cultural Council Fellowships, Magenta Flash Forward Foundation Fellowships, and Photo Lucida Critical Mass Finalist Awards, amongst other distinctions. Caleb regularly exhibits at a variety of national venues and has held solo shows in Boston, New York, Chicago, and St. Louis, among others. Their work is in the permanent collections of the MFA Boston, Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, MFA Houston, Newport Art Museum, Davis Art Museum, Brown University Art Museum, and the Leslie Lohman Museum of Art. Caleb currently teaches at BC and Leslie. And lastly, we'll have Dell Marie Hamilton, whose expansive practice includes curatorial projects as well as performance, painting, drawing, installation, video, sculpture, and photography. She has performed extensively throughout New England, including at the MFA, the Clark Institute, and the Hood Museum of Art at Dartmouth. In 2024, she performed with MacArthur Genius Fellow artist Maria Magdalena Campos Pons at the First Art Museum in Nashville. In 2019, she was a participating artist in the Havana Biennial, and in 2021, she was a recipient of the ICA Boston's James and Audrey Foster Prize. Her work has appeared in the Brooklyn Rail, the Boston Globe, Hyperallergic, including an essay by yours truly, Art in America and KA, Contemporary Journal of African Art, as well as in the anthology Anti-Blackness, edited by Moon Ki Jung and Zhao H. Costa Vargas. Her work has also recently been featured in the 2024 documentary Out of the Picture, written and directed by Mary Louise Schumacher, and her photographs are in the collections of Google, Tufts University, and the List Visual Arts Center. She is currently the acting director of the Ethelbert Cooper Gallery at Harvard's Hutchins Center, and received a 2024 Dean's Distinction Award for outstanding contributions to Harvard's Faculty of Arts and Sciences. So without further ado, we'll begin with Ebony.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Ebony. I'm the creator of Boston Urban Archive. It really, was just a hobby of mine, going through old film, newspapers, books, any physical collection that I could find, and I took to social media to sort of share the cool things that I was finding, but also with a larger purpose of highlighting, the Boston that I know, the Boston that's familiar to a lot of us, but isn't necessarily what mainstream media thinks of Boston. Go to the next one. These are a few slides or pictures and materials that I utilize. Again, old newspapers, an old picture of Donna Summer. She's a Boston native. The bottom left is out of a personal collection from a breakdancer in the 80s and 90s. Again, newspapers, and then the cassettes are at the University of Massachusetts Boston Library. So I'll go there and look at the physical cassettes. I'll listen to them and things like that. Go to the next one. So this is sort of an example of what I post on social media. I primarily use Instagram. So I like to stick to trends sometimes. I'm kind of strategic in that way, and the cost of food and produce has, been a talk of everyone lately. And I found this old news clip from '74 where the news reporter went into a local supermarket in Roxbury and was talking to the community about how they felt about the cost of food. And it's kind of funny looking at it now because they're complaining about candy being, 5 cents and steak being $2. It's how am I going to feed my family on this budget? And, it's just familiar to us now, and it just shows that, things kind of always come back again, and people have gone through a lot of things that we're going through now before. This one was probably one of the most viral videos. So, it's essentially, I watched a documentary that was probably an hour and a half long, and I just chopped it up to where I could find fashion and sort of that 90s fashion that we all love. And basically what I did was cut it up into a minute-long Instagram reel, put on a song from '92. I actually think I put on a song from '93, and I got a lot of slack from it. You would be surprised how much people pay attention. But I try to, I'm it doesn't have to be the exact year. It can go with the vibe, right? But no. So when that happened, I make sure a lot of the songs are from the year, literally. But yeah, this one, everyone loved it because it just showed Boston is this trendy, Boston, this looks like Boston. People are this looks like New York. And I'm this is why I started it. I feel people don't look at Boston as this cool, trendy, cultured, diverse place. You know what I mean? So I was really proud of this one. And then I think the other really popular videos that I create are the high school ones. I'm kind of going down the list, and I try to find raw footage from the news and stuff whenever they've been to high schools. Again, the same concept. I'll just chop up a news clip, and I'll just show the kids walking on the hallways, the teachers high-fiving the kids, and just these interactions and the diversity and how the schools looked at that time, architecturally compared to how they look now. It's definitely a blast from the past for a lot of people who have attended these schools, but then the current generation, makes that connection. I go to that school now, it did not look like that. So it's that intergenerational community connection that I'm creating with these high school posts. And I think, yeah, that's just a little bit of what I do.
Thank you, Ebony. Maybe do you want to just switch spots with me?
I'm trouble. I requested. Okay. Did it lose all of my notes?
No.
Okay. Okay, great. Sorry, my notes were gone. Thank you. I'm trouble. My name is Caleb. Most of my work involves collecting things, finding things, recontextualizing, transforming found things, found all over the place, but also interacting with archives. And I work with a lot of photos and ephemera, and I'm thinking about interacting with these objects as a way to think about connections between queer and trans people across space and time. So I have many complicated feelings about collecting and record keeping, both personal and institutional. Who are we saving for and why? what do we think these objects communicate? I'm really interested in like, do these objects hold any truths? When we go looking for objects in the archive, like what can they tell us? And what do we expect to be like legible or meaningful to people of the future? And is this even about the future at all when the future is not guaranteed? So I'm here to talk about two bodies of work that are maybe a little outside my normal modes of working. The first is that when the artist John O'Reilly died in 2021, he left behind hundreds of like books and clippings and little like bits of things that after museums had like, you know, taken his finished and signed work away, there were these books left over. And rather than these books go to waste, like his partner sort of like let students and me, like, you know, take some of these things away. And it really, like, all these little clips felt like, you know, they really felt alive with potential, and like they hadn't fully completed their purpose, that John had like started like them on a journey and they needed to finish that thing. And so I was able to take some of those home and start like working on a body of work out of these pieces. We don't really know each other. But I've long been inspired by John's work, and it's so much about like seeing himself and queerness in art history. And his work like directly relates to my own in its use of fragmentation, desire, mourning, borrowing from found things, and bringing them into sort of his queer world and to create new queer worlds. But I was also thinking a lot about like, okay, just because you really love someone's work, like what do we actually have in common? Like what is our connection? He's an older like gay cis man, and then like who are we to each other? And could maybe me using some of these materials like create some sort of relationship or some sort of thread between us? So at first I spent just like a long time like digging through everything and like thinking about his ways of working, looking at all these little pieces of tape, looking at the sort of things that he cut out or changed his mind, and also being like, I don't know, thinking about like themes, like what's his deal with Philip IV? Anybody who's seen a lot of his work, I was like, what is that? I don't know. But having seen a lot of his finished work, I like started like, as I'm working with these things, I'm imagining him in the studio with the very things that I'm holding. I felt like I was maybe repeating his gestures as I was clipping and gluing. I was building scenes through which I could become a voyeur into his process at the same time as I was maybe restaging his path to making. And I was thinking a lot about like what it does to imagine a relationship with someone, between myself and someone who is no longer alive, someone who I do not really know. That's something I think about all the time with the collected things that I have, like, what good does that do? I have lots of thoughts, but. And I was thinking a lot about art history, the ways that it's told, and like who feels like they belong or who is considered to belong. But also thinking a lot about photography's role as sometimes this weird outsider in art history, and that depending on who's telling the story. Even as much as like I myself feel like I don't always fit in photography or fit into genders or fit into other spaces, and John didn't call himself a photographer, and I don't really either, I don't know. So this was just me, like, in working with John's work, working with his scraps, like, thinking through these things. It was a way for me to sort of think about my own place in art and my own place in queerness and think about, like, these connections. So the other body of work quickly here is the second project is In Lieu of Flowers. So early in 2020, I was stuck at home, you know, hearing about more and more COVID deaths, and at the same time, the first half of 2020, there had already been as many murders of trans folks in the first half of 2020 as in all of 2019. And so like all these things are weighing on my mind, and I'm sort of thinking about like what to do with these feelings. And at the same time, I'm like trying to grow things. I'm like trying to grow roses and to keep these roses alive. And I'm thinking about like gardening as something that was like both productive and useless and hopeful and futile. And then I was experimenting with anthotypes. So here's like a little video. So for those of you, let me see if this works. Yes, okay. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with anthotypes, they're, you're making things out of natural materials, and they're like blended, ground, juiced, filtered, painted in thin layers onto paper over and over again to dry. And then you're placing a positive transparency on top, putting it out in the sun over and over again, sometimes for days. And then the highlights bleach away and the shadows are left behind. So this is something that can't be fixed, so additional exposure to light will inevitably cause it to fade. And so that's where, starting my thing over. And so that's where this project came about in the form that it is now. It's like a series of memorial portraits of trans people who've been murdered in the United States and Puerto Rico. And I wanted to think a lot about like, who are we to one another? Like, who are these people to me? Who could I be to them? And like, might I learn something by spending time with their images? If we're in community, like what are the responsibilities of being in community, like associated with those connections? And what does it mean to like mourn for, or to feel like I ache for people I've never met? What does it mean to feel like you might love those people? And it felt important for me to use images that folks had taken of, or at least posted of themselves, you know, where I hoped that they felt like good about the way they looked, because so often the pictures associated with like news stories or official archives are pictures, names, language that people wouldn't use for themselves. And so like trying to sort of parse that as like I work on the project is something difficult. And I started trying to make portraits of everyone who had died in 2020, and then 2021, and then I just kept going. But because of the like limited amount of sun, of flowers, of like how long it took to make them, I couldn't keep up. And I was thinking a lot about how the gesture of like trying, even though you know you'll never catch up, or that you'll never be able to like fully get there, is something that is kind of beautiful too. It's about like this gesture of love and devotion. So like growing the roses, preparing the paper, these exposures that sometimes took weeks, the whole thing took a lot of time. And it felt like it was all about time. It was like slowing down what felt too fast, like spending time being with, witnessing, like being devoted to and responsible for something without that feeling like it's like a bad obligation. And it felt sort of like the extension of like work that's being done by many community members for Trans Day of Remembrance. Like, who's responsible for remembering, for keeping these names, for keeping these things like alive? And then like shout out Boston and beginning here in Boston in '99. So choosing to like memorialize someone is political, and it stakes a claim to their like worthiness as someone like worth remembering, and like points to the absence like of these people from their families, their communities. And showing the work means exposing it to more light. So like since these you know, can't be fixed, they'll fade. So showing them to people means that like these will slowly fade away. And I think a lot about that and how important that is, and about sort of like how it mirrors, you know, I don't know, trans visibility, and like making yourself known is also making yourself vulnerable to all sorts of violence and erasure. But I also think that spending time making something that won't last is kind of the point, and kind of beautiful. I think about like archiving sometimes in that way, like attempting to preserve and care for objects, especially ephemeral ones, can be like this act of devotion and honoring. And I have lots more to say, so I hope you have a lot of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb.
Thank you for letting me switch seats.
Dell.
So I'm going to talk about an installation called The End of Susan, The End of Everything. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to try to talk very fast. This is an installation that was born out of my friendship with art historian and bibliophile Susan Denker that I developed for the ICA Foster Prize exhibition during the COVID pandemic. By the time I met Susan, she had already retired from 2 decades of teaching at the SMFA. She was known as an ornery, eccentric, almost mean, but brilliant, passionate, brilliant scholar. We were from different racial backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, but the glue that held us together was our love of African-American cultural production. When Susan passed away in 2016, I learned, very surprised, that I was named as a beneficiary in her will. My inheritance was mundane and extraordinary. It included her 2005 Toyota RAV4, her color art slides, her syllabi, her takeout menus, her vibrator, her reading glasses, her makeup and her maps, her kitchen appliances, her furniture, her china, her medications, office equipment, cameras, stereo systems, blaxploitation films, outdated media equipment. I also inherited the belongings of her her husband, Jerry Sobel, who was a lawyer. So I got his baby pictures, his dissertation, his philosophy books, and crates and crates and crates of classical music CDs. There were also several rare books, including a first edition Winter Trees poetry book by Sylvia Plath, a first edition of Octavia Butler's novel, Wild Seed, as well as signed literary works by major figures of the Harlem Renaissance, including Arna Bontemps and Countee Cullen. Fast forward to 2020, in conversation with curator Jeffrey DeBlois, I began to look at the work of artists who created similar kinds of installations that interrogate archival practice. So those artists include people like Renee Green, Kari Upson, Harold Zaman. As such, my installation was organized around her living room, her study, and her bedroom. Taking a cue from the cubby-style bookcase that was in her apartment, the angular lines mimicked the crown moldings, and that grid-line design spoke to her years of teaching the history of painting. To give you a sense of scale, the bookcase in the top image there was over 7 feet tall and spanned 17 feet. In the third image, this one here, I'll note that there are 3 Kodak slide projectors. Art historians from the analog bygone days of Kodak slide film know that sound. I selected all of the images in the slide projectors from all of her art slides, and then I had the preparators rig it to advance every 30 seconds. It ended up being almost like a Russian roulette. They went out of order all the time from the order that I had actually selected in, so there was like a ghost in the machine. The image way at the top there of the clouds is one of the last images in Susan's camera, and the one below that is one of my images. Next slide. I also wanted to make work in response to Susan's clothing, so I made 3 video-based works. The top one is called An Elegy for Susan, where I made slow and cryptic hand gestures in front of the camera. The second one is Les Dueling Demoiselles, a feminist response to the patriarchal gaze in Picasso's 1907 Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, and then Robert Colescott's 1985 painting, which is a response to Picasso, Les Demoiselles de Alabama Vestidas. Both are important paintings that were part of Susan's teaching materials. And then that third bottom image is a piece called Jackson Pollock, Two Figurative Alternatives, where I morph between being Jackson Pollock and Susan as I read her 1971 research paper where she explicates Pollock's desire to move back to figuration right before his death. Next slide. The process of responding and reflecting on Susan's personal collection signaled a multivalence. It brought to the surface questions of how meaning and legibility could be interwoven with her items versus my interest in history and pop culture. So take, for example, that 1967 debut album by the Velvet Underground and Nico, which was influenced by the Fluxus movement and John Cage. The intact and removable banana sticker was designed by Andy Warhol. The image of the banana also conjured for me the banana plantations of United Fruit Company, AKA Chiquita. Their exploitative history was the focus of my thesis work in grad school. Over the years, I've collected material culture related to the company's history. So next to that Velvet Underground album, I placed a banana recipe book that was produced by United Fruit Company here in Boston in 1904. The books behind it are books that chart the history of Honduras. And then there's also 2 books, one by Zora Neale Hurston as well as O. Henry. Both of them spent significant amount of time in Honduras. Honduras is also where my family is from, so I constantly go back to it as a source of inspiration. Susan's personal collection continues to be a project that I want to further probe so that I can just investigate further the relationship between art, appropriation, and intertextuality. Next slide. I'm going to shift now to a public art project entitled Mark, Phyllis, and Phoebe, A Murder Told in 3 Parts, which is being curated by Jasper Sanchez of the Boston Public Art Triennial. I'm producing this piece with a colleague named Angela Counts, who's a dear friend. It's going to be a 3-channel video work that will be launched in 2026. It's going to be in honor of our 250th anniversary of our so-called Democratic Republic. So the project recounts an 18th century poisoning of a man named Captain John Codman. In 1755, 2 enslaved African Americans, Mark and Phyllis, were tried and convicted of murdering Codman. The salacious bits about Mark and Phyllis's execution are beyond grotesque. Mark's body was gibbeted and hung for 20 years, and Phyllis was burned at the stake. There's only one other instance of a woman being burned at the stake, and that's an enslaved black woman named Maria in 1681. Phoebe, the other slave that was accused, was said to be sold off to the West Indies. Back in 2022, when I first learned about Mark's execution, Google quickly turned up this document here on the left, an 1883 research paper presented by Abner Goodell Cheney at Mass Historical Society. It's titled The Trial and Execution for Petit Treason of Mark and Phyllis, Slaves of Captain John Codman. On the right is a broadsheet, and the words, the last and dying words of Mark, aged about 30, are emblazoned across the top. The text of the broadsheet is said to be a speech that Mark gave just prior to his execution. In many instances, the way that we encounter enslaved persons is in the archive is account books, asset inventories, bills of sale. Instead, these items are unusual because they include Mark and Phyllis's voices. The Goodell paper includes criminal interrogations of Mark and Phyllis and details crucial aspects of the murder plot, the names of accomplices as well, and there's also an analysis of capital murder in the colonies. While Mark's broadsheet on the right tells his story and that he was born in 1725 in Barbados and that a brass maker named Mr. Salter taught him how to read. In 1798, there's in a letter from Paul Revere to Mass Historical Society founder Jeremy Belknap, we learn that Revere, actually recounting his famous ride, actually encounters Mark's body. Quote, after I passed Charlestown Neck and got nearly opposite where Mark was hung in chains, I saw two men on horseback under a tree. What's striking about the broadsheet and Goodell's paper is how much Mark and Phyllis's stories differ. Phyllis indicates that it was Mark's idea to poison Codman, while Mark throws Phyllis and Phoebe under the bus, claiming that they wickedly enticed me to procure poison to destroy my master. As I poured through these competing narratives, I turned to Sadie Hartman's theory of critical fabulation, where she instructs us to wrestle with the omissions and the gaps in the archive, listening for the unsaid, translating misconstrued words, refashioning disfigured lives. Next slide. So while the history of colonial Massachusetts, Black Massachusetts in particular, is popularly understood through the martyrdom of Crispus Attucks or the service of the Union Army's all-Black 54th Regiment, our project, for Angela and I, we will be focusing on what life in Massachusetts was like before we were a republic. Taking our cues from the multi-channel video work of John Acumfer and Isaac Julian, we seek to imagine Mark, Phyllis, and Phoebe's daily lives and the events that drove them to view poison as a means of escaping Codman's violent grip. Thank you.
So thank you, Dell, Ebony, and Caleb, for such rich and thoughtful presentations. What we'll be doing now is we'll have a discussion entre nous and then open it up to the audience for some further questions. And, you know, there's so many different avenues.
Directions to go.
Directions.
As is what the archive does.
Exactly. But I think that I wanted to begin thinking about the significance of this panel in a conference which is about publishing, and maybe we can think about publishing in a broader sense of making public and creating publics too, and how you see your projects contributing to you know, various aspects of opening up the archive, cracking open the archive, intervening. And the aspect of this fair that I find really remarkable and different from many other art book fairs is the focus on the multiple, right? The different formats that a publishing or a public history project could take. So could you talk about some of the main considerations that you have in mind or that that you think through as you work on your disparate projects related to the archive, thinking about which form, how do you convey an idea, how do you most effectively communicate what you're working on? Ebony, do you want to begin perhaps, because yours is the most, I think, confined to the digital realm, and I think that's a specific contribution of the Boston Urban Archive in this day and age.
Sure, yeah. So I've personally always been interested in journalism and writing, but as someone who is always on social media and realize that that's really where a lot of people consume so much information, I realized like the best way for me to kind of get my curations like across and make these connections was social media. I started off sort of like writing some articles about things I was finding. Like I wrote a pretty extensive article on Boston hip hop during like the 50th anniversary of hip hop. I kind of went into the archives and listened to those cassettes and was putting some information together, but it just didn't blow up and hit the same as, you know, being able to listen and watch and scroll through your phone and it come on your screen on social media. So that's why I decided to sort of use that platform to get, you know, my messages and my work across. It's also helped a lot to gain a lot of like community interactions, and I feel, you know, when you do go through archives, sort of like you were saying, like you're missing a lot of pieces, and you have to fill in a lot of blanks, and there's a lot of, you know, questions, and it does get kind of, you know, personal, and I have a lot of like whys and whos, and some archive descriptions, they don't give you enough. I find a lot of really cool pictures, and I'm like, where is this? Who are these people? I don't have those details. So for me, as, you know, someone who's doing this research, what I find is social media has been nothing but beneficial to me, because I'll post a clip and I'll get comments like literally identifying the people in the archives for me. And a lot of the times they'll give me full like background and stories that, you know, an archive description from the library does not give me. So it's helped with my research to just uncover so much more, bring it to social media and having like this interactive conversation.
I will say that for the Mark, Phyllis, and Phoebe project, initially I'd been approached to do a performance piece for Lot Lab. But as it happened, I broke my ankle. So there was not going to be any performing. But I learned about Mark's execution in late 2022 from another artist named Pamela Council. And when she told me about his body hanging for 20 years, like I don't think I heard another thing after that. I was like on Google immediately. And so initially I thought, well, maybe I'll do like a, you know, once I'm healed up, I'll do a durational piece, you know, sort of reciting Mark's last testimony. But the more I sort of looked at all those weird discrepancies between sort of the official record and then Mark's story, I realized, like, you know, how do I feel about him throwing the two black women under the bus, right? So then it was about how do we help to tell Phyllis and Phoebe's stories, what they might have been experiencing to, again, sort of get to a place where you commit murder. So that's when I started to just kind of think about like what would happen if I did some sort of multi-channel piece, which I'd never done before. I've made one channel, single channel video-based works, and usually of me performing in front of a camera, but trying to imagine how to become like a film director or a writer was something that thankfully Jasper and Kate trusted me to do. But immediately for me, I began thinking about the work of my friend Angela Counts, who's a filmmaker and documentarian. As it turns out, I have an undergrad in journalism, Ebony, and then I have an MFA in art. So my way of coming to art comes out of reporting and research anyway. So for me, it's always just about like, what are the objects or the materials telling me? Where are the gaps in the questions? What are the things I don't understand? And then how do I think about making things legible? And I think a lot of what has informed my way of thinking about audiences is curatorial practice. What do I want to draw people's attention to? And in particular, the site itself becomes an organizing principle for how to tell a particular story. So.
I guess hopping off of some of those things, like thinking about like, you know, or at least when I think about like the way that we find out information, the way that the way that information is collected and the way that you hear about like trans murders, for instance, is like usually like I'm on social media and there's like, okay, this is where I'm finding something out. But also like we think about the sort of context. It's oftentimes like the 20th, the 21st, like, you know, you're sort of like thinking of things in numbers and marking it in that way, but also like that'll pass by in no time. You'll be like, oh, I see this, and then like the next, maybe it's like a couple days later, now we're on 23rd, or, and so like, it was about like, I want to hold these things, or like, how do I keep them all in my mind, or how do I like spend more time with? So it's about like, even though things are forever on the internet, it's sort of like, they also pass so quickly. So then how do I like spend more time with something? How do I slow this down and like spend time looking and see how that affects like my ability to like, I don't know, remember? Not that that's the only goal, but like thinking about like how to engage with it in a way that really like slows things down and feels like it's very like a slow witnessing rather than this kind of fast witnessing, at least in that respect. I could probably say something else about John's, but I don't know. So yeah.
Great. Thank you. One aspect of your work that it's something that both you and Dell have used is this idea of inheritance, I think, as, in your case, inheriting materials from Jim Tilleen, from John R. Reilly, and of course, Dell inheriting Susan Denker's possessions, archive, if you call it that. And then I think more broadly, all of us inherit histories, the burdens of histories, their pains, their delights. I know that you probably, Ebony, deal with different forms of archives, whether they're institutional or ones that were passed down between families or friends, kin circles, or whatever have you. Yeah. I'm curious about this word inheritance. For me, it's always kind of registered as a heavy word, that is marked by its passivity, something that's done to you. And it seems to me that across your projects, one thing that you're doing is turning that around. You're creating, turning it into something that's more generative, reparative, collaborative, collective, offering new critical understandings, new interventions. Can you talk about, do you agree with this, I guess, first of all, and how do you feel about the term inheritance as it relates to the work that you do?
I was thinking about like inheritance also of like, how do I, in anything that I make, how do I come to be in possession of other people's family photos? And I think it's often like the idea of inheritance as this thing that is this burden that you carry around. There are people who are like, I have these albums, I don't know who anyone is, I don't know anything about them, and I just keep carrying them around. And so people like want to unload them, or they like, I don't know how everything ends up out in the world, but I think there is something to like, what do I do with these things? Is this just an obligation? Is this like, what do I do with these objects? And so I'm sort of like, I don't know. I will take these on. I don't know. I will treasure them, but also like my interest or like what I'm doing with them is probably very different than like the burden that people feel when they have these objects. And I guess like for you, you were like, you didn't know you were gonna have this inheritance, whereas like I elected in. I was like, please, can I have these? As far as John's stuff, I was like in the right place at the right time to be like, please, can I have this? So I don't know. It probably feels different when suddenly you have the amount of things that it sounds like you have, that does feel sort of overwhelming.
It did, for sure. As I said, I get like a call from an attorney who I've never heard of, who is like, you've been named in Susan Denker's will. I didn't know she was ill. I knew she was grieving because her husband had died the summer before, but essentially they tell me like, you've inherited like the contents of her apartment, and I'm just like, she lived in a 4th floor walk-up, and it was like stacked from the floor to the ceiling with books and food and furniture. Like there was, for months, she didn't even let me come up to her apartment because it was only like a little trail you could get through the different rooms, and it was labyrinthine. It was shocking and heartbreaking, particularly since we didn't really get to say goodbye. So for about 5 years, it just all sat in a storage unit because I didn't know what to do with it. Over time, I started thinking about used bookstores. There's a youth bookstore in the South End, More Than Words. So I started donating books to their bookstore because I thought, well, then maybe, again, that's a regenerative process, right? Someone else will get something out of this. This employs young people who have been part of the court system. So that was sort of like the first kind of inklings that something could happen beyond this like obligation that I had. And then even like right before I get the call about the Foster Prize, I had learned that there was a second storage unit. So then there was more things in there. So that was another kind of instance of like, okay, who can I give things to? Who would welcome these objects? So that was a way of me just kind of working through my grief. So yeah, it was certainly a feeling of inheritance as something burdensome and costly because I was paying these storage fees. And then, for a while I would sort of kind of leave it alone and like not think about it. And it was really talking with Jeff, sort of telling him this insane story where he was like, no, how about you go to the storage unit and you look more closely, right? Like at her teaching materials or at the art slides. And that's where things started to kind of crystallize with something that could happen. But again, it was during COVID. I had 8 months to produce this piece. I had no idea where it was going. Jeff called it mapping the unmappable. I installed it literally on site. We had five days to install it. And each of those cubbies, I didn't know what was going in each cubby until I got there. That one cubby with the Andy Warhol, that was the only one I had figured out at that time, mostly because 8 months on top of working a full-time job, other studio projects, and just COVID, right? Trying to stay alive. I didn't know what that piece was going to look like. I knew what books I had selected. I had made checklists for myself, and I signed off on some loan docs, and I did a couple of sketches of what the bookcases would look like. And I knew that it was going to somehow speak to her space. So again, the curator in me is like, okay, take every one of those little cubbies and look at it as a gallery space. And over again, through those 5 days, it was like, okay, this little tiny room, 12 by 12 square, like what goes in this room? It was white knuckle, like, where is the thing going? Because again, right, that's what archives and personal collections are, right? You have emotional feelings towards them, but at the same time too, like you've signed your life away on this contract, but you're also a steward, right? So for me, it was incredibly fraught. I think what made it really valuable was people coming up to me, even till the present, who still tell me how much that piece impacted them, because it was a period of time where we couldn't be together, right? And given how many people had died during the pandemic, it was that's when I realized, like, oh wait, me selecting these objects and making sense of them, someone else is doing this exact same thing for someone who'd passed away during the pandemic. So that was one piece of it. And just the notion of time, because while the show was up, there were 3 writers whose books were on the shelves who passed away. So David Driscoll, Bell Hooks, and Greg Tate. So it was eerie, again, like the ghost in the machine thing was absolutely present. So yeah, I still wear Susan's clothes. I still go back to read her letters. I reread her emails. So yeah, the fraught is still there, the inheritance is still there, but I'm always then thinking about, like, how can I make this process open for someone else for it to find meaning in it, so.
Yeah, so inheritance for me, what I do, it's a bit different because, like you said, I haven't really, inherited anything personally. But now that I've started this work, I've gotten a dozen emails with people sending me, for example, I've had this man, he said his father was a reporter for a local newspaper, and he sent me over a bunch of pictures of like his articles that he has at home. There is someone who owns a record store actually in Cambridge, and I'm gonna meet with him next week because he said that he's sitting on like a bunch of, old archives, and he wants me to come take a look at some things and see if I want anything from it. So I'm sort of like inheriting things now that people recognize that I see value in them, and that, I now have a platform that other people see value in these things that are just, sitting somewhere. Also, I think that I'm able to sort of give access to people who maybe should have inherited some things that didn't or didn't know they existed. There's been quite a few times now where I've posted old film and family members will comment saying that like one of their family members who has passed is actually in that film clip. And then they kind of give me their story, and then it becomes a lot more personal for me. But these are also clips that they never have even seen of their family member.
Wow.
And it could be from like 70s, 80s, 90s. It's kind of generally where I am with a lot of things. So, you know, it's giving them something all of these decades later, something that they can, you know, inherit now and have for themselves, you know, for their family.
Well, thank you. At this point, I wanted to open it up to the audience for a question or two. And there's a mic that will be circulating. So does anyone have questions? Lynn?
Yes.
Thank you. So I have a question for each of you, actually, or maybe collectively. And I like each of you as makers and cultural producers who use archives. As you manipulate them and change them and sort of integrate them into your own practice, they become part of your archive. And I'm wondering, one, if it makes sense to think about it in that way, and then two, how does then the archive get interpreted, you know, as it gets translated in different practices over time?
I can answer that. So a few of my pieces, so I have to manipulate what I find, generally, especially if it is like film and footage, to sort of fit social media. And I realize that when I do that, I sort of have to like explain myself. So for example, I have one clip, and it's actually in South Boston at Carson Beach. It's mid-70s, and what I posted on my page is, it looks like Carson Beach is just full of Black happiness and joy. It's a day on the beach, you know, and I put a song, I forget the song that I put, but it's a very like sunny summer day, 70s song. Like, I think it was Summer Breeze maybe. And when you watch this clip, you just get a sense of like joy and summer and family and a good time. But when you actually look at the raw footage, there was a whole police sort of barricade because no one wanted the Black people to go on the beach that day. So when you can actually see in the clip, but I kind of cut it, but you can see the police barricade behind them, or as, you know, a Black couple's walking, there was like a police officer not too far behind them. Like, so it was actually a day full of sort of turmoil in another sense. So as I'm doing things from like a journalistic lens, and I provide all of that context to sort of like explain like the manipulation that I did to put something across, but what the actual raw footage is. So I provided all of that like in the caption. Yeah.
I'm not sure that I can say that I have an archive. Like, I don't think about myself that way, that like I have a personal archive. I have stuff. I think of Susan's collection as an archive, and I think of Jerry's things as an archive, and then obviously, you know, Mark and Phyllis have their voices. And I've certainly visited archives. I've been looking for a lost Zora Neale Hurston manuscript, which is in the wind somewhere. But yeah, I think if I start thinking of myself as having a personal archive, then I've kind of lost my mind at that point, like I'm taking myself a little too seriously. So yeah, I think the word archive to me now means multiples, just, you know, the way that we're in this kind of multiples format. That's exactly how I think about archives, that there is no one archive, and that the people that initially set up, you know, archives within institutions, they had their own intentions and manipulative desires. So I sort of use that as my license to do what I need to do to help sort of pinpoint and elevate and contextualize what I'm finding and what I'm thinking about. So
I think a lot about like continuing on the intentions of original makers, or like what it means to like extend that or to like step into that space. Like when you take a selfie and post it, you anticipate people will look at it and what it means to continue to look at that. Or like when you, I don't know, you start a process, there's this intention of things like extending. And when that can't continue, or when someone doesn't have that family album to keep looking at it because like it got made to continue to be looked at, there's something about like stepping into those spaces of continuing to engage with the intentions of the makers that feels really sort of beautiful and important. So like a lot of times I feel like I'm taking on the role of continuing on this thing into the future, which I don't know if that answers some of it, but there's something about that I was thinking about when I was listening to you.
There's a question in the back.
Thank you so much. I have a question about, and you've shared some of this already, about the gaps in each of the archives you're looking at. And looking forward, if you were to think about your grail, about if you could find something that you wish existed, or maybe you'll stumble upon someday, looking forward, what do you wish you can find to incorporate into each of your practices?
What is it? What do we want to find in archives? Is that, yeah, what would be our wish to find? For me, it would be that Zora Neale Hurston manuscript. Yeah, it's, when she passed away, she was destitute. So her things were put out on the street and like trashed. But by some miracle, a close friend was passing by when her apartment was being emptied. So many things are at the University of Florida. From there, I learned something about this particular manuscript, but at the same time, it wasn't located there. From there, I decided, okay, well, I'll go to Scribner's archive, which is at Princeton. In Connecticut, and from there I found, oh, the manuscript isn't there either. But what is there are her editor's notes in response to the manuscript. So there's a part of me that's like, oh, what could I recreate this manuscript based on the notes? So that's kind of like my wish list project at some point that someone can help me figure out. So
I think sometimes anything that I actually found might be less interesting than the things that we could all imagine. Sometimes. And also, I don't know, I think I'm sometimes more interested in looking at the absence than in trying to find something that is a true, whatever that means, fill for that absence. I'm sort of interested in like, why are there those absences? What does that point to? You know, I could talk about that forever. I mean, I'm sure all of us could, but so I don't know. Sometimes I think there's something maybe more, there can be something more generative, and not always, but in imagining what's in those spaces, like what can come from that?
Yeah, I think that there's so many untold stories that are sitting in people's basements, in their dining rooms, you know, in their households, that people are sitting on. And I think there's a lot of names and historical figures and things that we know. But I think everyday folk have a lot to, you know, uncover and bring to the table. So I think with what I'm doing, you know, as I am starting to go into the community and connect with people, you know, just like getting these stories and getting these old pictures that you can't find anywhere else because the family has them. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's so much more to be told and said. So just looking forward to that. The names I've never heard, you know, the people that I've never heard.
Can I ask you a question? So you're a little bit collecting physical things now, a little bit?
Yeah.
And then are you like, when you meet people, are you like digitizing their things, or like how are you getting access to these things that maybe they're not giving up, but they want to make available?
Yeah, so primarily I go through like my university archives that have some pretty cool collections. So I go to places that are like publicly accessible, but you have to make an appointment and things like that. And you know, I'll go on YouTube and like just go down the rabbit hole of, I'll find really cool videos that have like 20 views that were uploaded 15 years ago, but the footage is so cool and it's just, no one has ever given it any sort of, you know, spotlight. I'm literally on any sort of platform you can think of, and then now as I connect with a lot of people, I do sort of just take pictures of things on my own, but I'm starting to get like the equipment where I can like digitize things like for myself, where I don't need to take what you have And then I'm, adding to my own personal collection. I mean, a ton of books, like old records, cassettes, things that people are giving me, pictures. A lot of it is digital, but yeah.
Cool. Just curious.
Yeah, sort of from everywhere, multiple formats.
Is there one more question? I see a hand.
Thank you all for your offering. This was absolutely beautiful. And Dell and Ebony, I enjoy seeing y'all in spaces, and pleasure to be an acquaintance, Caleb. So my question is a bit existential, so forgive me in advance. I really appreciate the ways in which y'all presented these archives. And Crystal and I, we have this thing where we say, like, archives is a way of saying gratitude, is a way of giving gratitude. And so I'm really appreciative of what you guys have all offered. And this thing around memory is like haunting me in the ways that all of you guys have presented archives in a charge to remember. And so the question that I'm so hesitant to ask, but I'm very curious to know is, one, what is your own relationship with memory, and how do you remember? And also, like, if there's any inspiration or charge for us here listening, like, how do we also build a relationship with memory in ways that it can be a living archive, even if it is within just our homes or our communities? Sorry in advance, once again, it's a very scattered question here, but I just am very curious about of your answers here.
That's a beautiful question. Thank you.
It is. Please go. You made me think of something. I'm not like just being
She made
rude.
me think of something too.
I know. I was like, oh, I had a quote in mind, but I was like, I cut it for time. But I'm like gonna find it in my phone. You give me 1 second, but please go.
So thank you for that question, because you actually just helped me figure something out. For the longest time, I've been trying to understand why I collect things and why, and again, what is my relationship to memory. I think some of it has to do with the fact that I have a learning disability. So I have ADHD and some dysgraphia issues. So my short-term memory is incredibly porous. So imagine trying to be a reporter and writing things down with really poor handwriting and trying to then report back, right? It was a disaster. I figured out, like, breaking news is not the way that I work. It's not how my brain functions. So there's a way in which I think now that what I'm trying to do by collecting and working in archives is to maybe repair my own memory process. But again, I didn't know that until literally just now, so I thank you.
For me, it's a bit personal. I feel like I'm at that age where now, I have like nephews that are like 7 and 8, and I'm looking at these little people, like I was once that age, and now, like, the way I see my parents is totally different from how I did when I was younger. I want to hear their stories. When I was a teenager, I'd be like, oh, Dad, like, he thought he was so cool back in the day, or like whatever. And now I'm like, tell me all about it. Like, I feel like you get to a point in your life where you really appreciate life and its experience and the wisdom, and you want to take it in. And, that sense of like nostalgia and that feeling when you go somewhere and you remember like how it smells and the fun you had there, the memories, like I just appreciate that. And I know that with the work that I do, other people really get that sense. It's relatable. They see people they know. They see places that they've walked past a million times and didn't know what it used to be. So I think now that I've gotten to that age where I just really appreciate, life and the stories and just individuals and everything that they have in them, I feel like I just hold on to like memories of these stories, and yeah.
I was gonna say, it's like a combination. I also, traumatic brain injury and just recently diagnosed with ADHD, so my memory is also terrible, so there's that. And my mom passed away when I was 23, and I think that I didn't fully think about inheriting and taking these things. Like I have some stuff, maybe I wish I had more, and I also think about like, what can I know about her? Like I didn't ask all the questions, and so like now I have these objects, and what do they tell me? But then I have this quote. This is I literally cut this. It's specifically about like blackness in the archive, but I think it can relate to a lot of things. But so much of Black life and work and resistance goes missing. Black people work to hold all of this information in our heads, oftentimes unbolstered by institutions, oftentimes against such institutions' purposeful forgetting. We have to function as a living library as an institution. And I was thinking about how that relates to so many folks, and especially right now with everything being sort of erased from so many sort of like spaces, what it means to sort of be to try to be the keepers of those things and to keep those things alive. So I don't know, there was something in my brain too along those lines that I was thinking about.
Who's the author of that?
Oh, sorry, I'm really terrible. That's Christina Sharp. And I was like, wow, this hit me like, I don't know, like a ton of bricks.
Yeah.
Well, what a question to end on, and thank you, Caleb, Ebony, and Dell. Your work is important, and I'm personally so inspired by everything that you do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah, come talk to us. Come talk to us.